how does academic design training differ from real world design practice? I don't think we'd be able to speak very broadly about training across all design institutions. We can speak more personally to our experience in design college, um, and we can take it from there. But yes, Shadid, I would like for you to go first in answering this question.
I think when you are studying in an academic environment, it is always like an hypothetical project, right? I mean, sure, you can take it ahead and bring it to the real world. That's always an option. But with a lot of assignments, the only people involved are you and your faculty members. So I feel like when you actually go out in the industry, the amount of stakeholders that are there are a lot more.
Right.
So a lot of times, you don't have complete control over what you produce, and you have to kind of, as you start working in the industries, to try to strike a balance when it comes to kind of doing the right thing creatively and also kind of keeping in mind the intentions and the needs of the stakeholders that are involved, because they come in with a different POV, which maybe you don't always understand, but it is also right in their own sense. Maybe there's a bit of marketing or like business point of view to what they have to say, but I feel you also have to take that into consideration. I had a very hard time kind of dealing with it initially, but I feel like over the years I've kind of gotten comfortable in a way that okay, like thoda I'm adding in, thoda I'm letting their opinions in, and kind of trying to strike a middle ground. So I think that was one of the biggest changes that I kind of found out. Yeah, I think that was my biggest takeaway when I actually started working out. What about you?
Interesting. So I think it differs in some ways, and I think in some ways, what GIF did for us really equipped us to deal with the industry as well. Because our training, in some sense, in retrospect, I didn't realize how holistic it was in the sense that um, you more or less get you get a taste and experience across different disciplines, like or across different aspects of what it takes to execute any given project. For instance, if a given project requires a photographer and you don't have a photographer, or even if you have a photographer, there goes a lot of thought into how exactly do you want to showcase your product. So you have a lot of background research that you do in that direction. You have to understand that product and understand how it functions in relationship to its environment. You have a lot of analyses that goes behind that, and that's just one aspect. And if there is a model involved, there is a certain degree of, let's say, uh, presentation in terms of, let's say, styling, in terms of makeup. And that is something that you have to get involved with, even if your discipline doesn't 100% involve styling or makeup. Even if it's just, even if you're a textile designer who's, let's say, made a sari, for instance, a huge aspect of how you end up portraying that sari or how you end up talking about the sari is the storytelling. And you learn so much about storytelling and the different layers and the aspects of storytelling. That is something I believe you carry with into the industry. And I agree with what you said. And to add to it, or rather to pitch in how I perceive this, I think there is a loop in design. And there is a certain sense of idealism you have when you are in college. And there is a certain sense of pragmatism that the industry brings with it. And we generally, as creatives, tend to perceive pragmatism as something that is not necessarily incoherence, or not necessarily something that entirely aligns with our creative vision. Sometimes we don't like that we have to deal with practicality because we feel like it stifles us, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. I think great design is a product of constraint, and the whole loop, when you actually get into the industry, that I see coming to a crescendo is the feedback. So the feedback is one aspect that remains unfulfilled for a majority of, I think, your college life, unless, well, you do get to taste it here and there, let's say during your internship or your graduation project or your summer um, projects and whatnot. But I still think the degree to which you experience that is a lot more intense once you are in the industry as opposed to when you're in academia. When you're in academia, it's more about you still have a lot more room to make errors, to be more yourself, to go a little wild with your creativity, and to not exactly always or necessarily take commercial considerations into account when designing. And it's not necessarily bad. I mean, it's not something that you probably would get to do again. It's not something that you necessarily won't get to do again either. But it's great that, I think a bit of both is necessary. But that would be one distinguishing factor between, let's say, the academic training versus the real world practice.
Yeah, I'd like to add a bit more in here, wherein, as you rightly mentioned, that already when it comes to your academic setting, there's a lot of critique that you get from your faculties, which sometimes might feel a bit excess. And when you are in your second, third year and you're actually in it, you might actually feel like, oh, this is just way too much of a critique to what I've just made. But I feel sometimes it is necessary because it kind of just makes you ready to kind of dodge or like just deal with the kind of questions that might be asked to whatever creative project that you would produce once you're out there. And like while that teaches you a bit of like storytelling and presentation skills at that point in time, as when you enter the industry, I think your storytelling improves, because
Hmm.
when you're out there you actually have to explain your creative process and ideas to people who don't necessarily belong to a creative background, so you have to kind of
Right.
hone in on that skill a bit more. And I think that's like an interesting discovery that I had oh, like I'm able to narrate much better now that I've worked.
Right. Right. And I do think that, like, to paraphrase the words of Einstein, with the more simplicity that, or the simplicity and ease with which you can communicate an idea is probably highly um, definitive of how good you are at what you do. Because we end up thinking that using big words or using complexity as um, a tool is something that makes us stand out. But I believe it can be both. It can also be a veil. It can be a charade. And the more simplicity that you can bring about in your work, the more sophisticated your work becomes. And it's not necessarily bad if a lot of people understand it. It can also be a demarcator of success. It doesn't necessarily have to be mass.
Yeah, it is an indicator of like how well you understand your own idea, and then secondly, how
Right.
well are you able to communicate it, which is very necessary when it comes to the design field. I mean, if you were in the art field, I would still say, okay, you can be in your own world, and you can be very much immersed in it to an extent that okay, it's not readily understandable. But well, design is it is a commercial side to it, and it is
Right.
necessary that things get communicated in the right way. And especially in the internet age when things are easily taken out of context, I think it's very necessary that you're clear with your communication. So it's
Yeah.
more necessary as we advance ahead.